What happens when one man tries to watch all the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. Welcome back to the 80s Project, and yeah, we're about, with this episode, we're about halfway through 1984 by this point, and yeah, 84 has had some of the biggest releases in all of horror, although this episode, not so much. This block kicks off with a British film that premiered at a festival on July 10th in Los Angeles and wouldn't go wider until April of 85, and it's The Company of Wolves. It starts with this good boy right here running into this big palatial estate, and Sark is here, and he has a couple of daughters, and one is named Rosaline. She has a dream about her sister in the past running through a forest where there's giant evil teddy bears and whatever the living hell that this thing is, which are toys in Rosaline's room. And I want to set both of these on fire immediately. There's also wolves that she ends up in the company of because we need a title, and she's killed. After Alice's funeral, Rosaline hangs out with her grandma, Jessica Fletcher, and she warns her about the danger of the wolves, along with the really important information to stay away from men whose eyebrows meet, which is actually really good life advice. But then she starts to tell a story about a woman in the village. And bear in mind, this is a story that a woman is telling a girl inside of a dream a girl is having inside of a movie that we are watching. Inception. In her story, someone who knows all there is to know about the Crying Game is married to the woman Graham is telling about. But look at those eyebrows. Don't trust them, lady. Especially when that dude vanishes for years, but returns to reveal that he's now all wolfy. And in an era of cool transformation scenes, what do you do that hasn't been done? Well, how about have the dude tear off his skin down to muscle and have the beast grow out of that? But Granny's got another story, and this one's about a young man walking through the woods and coming face to face with General Zod, who gives him a potion that puts him in that scene from Evil Dead. And that part seems to leak into the real world, 2 layers up. Meanwhile, there's wolf problems in Rosaline's village as well, so she goes to tell her mother a story. And this one's about a bunch of aristocrats at a party who receive a little vengeance from a pregnant enchantress. A vengeance that involves them turning into doggos. There's also one final story concerning a young she-wolf and a priest, and clearly this is a sort of anthology tale, with one of the more unusual framing sequences out there, and also a dark retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. It was by Neil Jordan, and it was only his second film after a 1982 drama called Angel, but would later go on to get an Oscar for writing The Crying Game, which he also directed. It was based on the works of acclaimed writer Angela Carter, and she co-wrote the screenplay as well, and was given a budget of $2 million. One thing that budget didn't accommodate, though, was the ending that Jordan wanted, as he wanted the film to end with real-life Rosaline jumping off her bed into the floor, which would then turn into water. But he couldn't figure out how to make it work with the resources available, so it was scrapped, something that he still regrets. It got some strong reviews, though, with many praising its dreamlike feel and gothic atmosphere, and it was a mild success, bringing in around $4.5 million at the box office. And this is a pretty one. It's a 3.5. I don't think the script totally works, and the ending sort of just falls apart, but it's so gorgeous, and the mood it's creating is fascinating. The horror cultural significance is a 3 since it had some name recognition and a number of known faces, but never really took off and wasn't widely seen. Should you watch it? Yeah, get in this company. This next one was tricky because of a title issue that I'll talk about later, But it also didn't have a confirmed date and is only known to have been released in Indonesia at some point in 1984, and it's Revenge of the Ninja. It's got this very elaborate looking gang looking to get this necklace off of a guy with just the most amazing hair, headband, and mutton chop combo. They all try to take it, but he wipes them all out and is seemingly bulletproof as well, until he's not. He vanishes, and the leader, an Old West looking gunslinger, gets the necklace, but whoops, it's a fake. But then there's this shirtless fella, and that's Barry Prima, action star, and we just saw him over on the Sci-Fi Project in The Devil's Sword. But here he gets a love montage that includes him crashing a dune buggy for some reason. But his lady friend seems to have pissed off the wrong people. She kicks all of their asses thanks to the spiritual help of Kohar, who then gives her the red stone and asks her to guard it. She has to wear it, but then there's a big disco scene involving a massive helm, and yes, I looked up what they were called because I was just going to say pirate ship steering wheel. Ricky gets concerned about how Maya is acting, so he seeks the help of a spiritualist, which means strobe lights, I guess. But then, when that gang finds out that she has it, the battles begin. And there's not a lot of horror here, and it's more fantasy, I guess. And I was a little confused as to where this one belonged in terms of putting it here or the Sci-Fi Project, since that's where I would normally put fantasy-driven films. But I went with here. And it's by Ratno Timoer, and that's a name that we haven't seen since 1981 with Gundala, the superhero flick. This has several different titles, and it's weird that it got a release here as Revenge of the Ninja, considering there was another film with that name in 1983, although that was a more straightforward action film. There's also a fight with a hunchback at one point, and he's defeated by deflating his back by stepping on it. And the very ending of this film features zombie attacks, which is the main reason for placing it on the horror project, but they're not in it very much. And I'll give this one a 2. It's charming at times, but for the most part, it's an incoherent mess and starts to swing to the boring side. The HCS is just a 1 since it's not known at all and is barely horror and is mostly just mistaken for that other film with the same name. Should you watch it? I'd say you can pass. Here's another one from the UK, and it's also another one that didn't have a specified release date, and is another one that is just known to have come out in 1984, and it's Lipstick and Blood. The opening is pretty hilarious as we cut between a stripper on stage and a guy fondling a gun, and I'm sure that those two things don't have any subtextual meaning at all. He goes to watch the show, and the music is legitimately solid 80s tunes by a band called Field of One that I liked enough to try to find afterwards, but no dice. There was harmony. Jay then picks up a prostitute and takes her back to his place, which I imagine any woman would look once at and then just run in the other direction, but she doesn't. But she does write "whores hate their clients" in lipstick on his mirror. Or maybe he wrote it because he killed her and stuffed her in his closet, because dude's crazy. That dancer is Jenny, and she lives with her parents, but Jay is stalking her and just generally acting nuts.
You smell like plastic!
Well, yeah. It'd probably be more surprising if it didn't. But Jenny has a boyfriend, and they're planning on getting married, and she's only dancing to earn money for their wedding. As you can imagine, Jay's pretty unhappy about that, so he kidnaps her at gunpoint, takes her out to the countryside, and forces her to put on lipstick. He then assaults her, but then decides to take things further by going to get her fiancé as well, and straight up shoots him. So now Jenny has to stick with him and hope that she doesn't end up covered in both lipstick and blood. And this one is curious because it's shot on video, and it's from a very established director with Lindsay Shantive. He'd been making films since the early 60s and was responsible for a couple of James Bond knockoffs called Number One of the Secret Service and The Second Best Secret Agent in the Whole Wide World. This one was apparently his tip of the hat to giallos, something he had done earlier with a film called Night After Night After Night, although actually on film there. It didn't really make any sort of dent in the box office over there, and has since become practically completely forgotten. And this is a 2.5. There's not much to it, but there's this weird sleaziness to it that's oddly appealing, and Joseph Peters is really committing to his dark role. Plus, that soundtrack is just irresistible. The significance is just a 1 though, since it's basically completely forgotten and doesn't feature any faces of note. Should you watch it? Probably not, but maybe for the weirdness of it.
Oh, great. I've got constipation now.
This is yet another film from the UK, although it appears to have gotten a US release first, although the date is not definitely known, but it was in July of '84, possibly July 1st, and it's Scream for Help. It starts with a voiceover from a young girl named Christy, and she says that she thinks her stepfather is trying to kill her mother. It then flashes back several weeks as she tells the story, and her stepdad is Paul here, and she says that he stole her mom away from her dad, but he's up to something odd at night down in the basement. The next day, they find out that a meter reader went down there to do his job and was electrocuted, and Christy believes it was a trap set for her mother. Her friends don't believe her and think that she just resents him for breaking up her parents, so she decides to follow him around, discovering that he's having an affair. Unfortunately, he knows that she knows, and of course, no one still listens. Someone tampers with her mother's car's brakes, and even worse, she comes home to catch them having really loud sex. But then when she spies on him again at a hotel, again she catches him getting naked. So this movie is basically about this girl watching her stepfather have sex. And there's whole sections of that now on certain sites out there. But then, Christy's friend Janie, who goes out of her way to say that she's only 17 years old, even though the film earlier gave us a prolonged nude scene with her, is run over by a random car in a pretty spectacular fashion. Things get more complicated when Janie's boyfriend starts putting the moves on her, like a couple of days after she dies, and it's like, why didn't you guys just bone at the funeral? But is Paul really trying to do in Karen, or is something else at play here, especially when it turns into a full-on home invasion flick? And this one is from Michael Winner, the director of the Death Wish films, or at least the first 3 of them. But he'd also dipped into the horror world with The Sentinel, an awesome flick from '77. The script, however, was by none other than Tom Holland, and is his lesser-known entry cushioned around a bunch of bigger works. Seriously, right before this he wrote Psycho 2 and Cloak and Dagger, and right after he did Fright Night and then Child's Play, so it was a small script right in the middle of big stuff. Funnily enough, it was meant to be directed by Richard Franklin, who also did Psycho 2 and Cloak of Dagger, but since he was starting to make bigger profile pictures, he decided that doing this low-budget horror thriller would be a bad career move and dropped out. The budget was somewhere between $3 to $6 million, and it seems like it may have gotten a limited release, but there's no financial information, and it appears as if the bigger push was made on the home market. And this is really solid. It's a 3.5. It's like this weird little thriller that seems like it's doing one thing, but then just becomes this whole other, much more violent thing. Holland's a solid writer, and even with low production values, this was a ton of fun. The HCS is just a 1.5 though, since it didn't make any sort of impact and had no real stars, but had Winner and Holland involved to give it that extra 0.5. Should you watch it? Yeah, give this one a chance.
Not only is he an incompetent murderer, he's a total asshole.
Here's another one that just has a release date of sometime in July, although it's possible that it got a release back in May, and it's Disconnected. This one also starts with a pretty strong new wave track as a young woman named Alicia helps out an old guy by letting him use her phone. But then, he just vanishes with the receiver off the hook. She then goes out to a club with her boyfriend, and this band is called the X-Tracks. And this is pretty cool because this guy right here is none other than John Bryan. And later he'd become a member of Till Tuesday with Amy Mann, and later became a hugely influential producer and did film scores for Magnolia, Eternal Sunshine, Lady Bird, and so many other awesome flicks. This right here is his very first film appearance or work ever. Alicia also works at a video store, and one day an oddball customer comes in to talk about movies, even though he claims to not have a VCR, and he then says that he saw her at that club and is an admirer. There's also a string of murders investigated by cops, and one of them is Carmine Capobianco, who some of you may recognize from Psychos in Love, a film that I've covered on the channel somewhat recently. But then, when Franklin comes back to her shop, she says no thank you, but then starts getting weird phone calls where no one talks to her, but it sounds like she can overhear conversations between her boyfriend and sister discussing an affair. Not only that, but she starts having layered nightmares in which they're killing her. Because of this, she breaks down and agrees to go out with Franklin, except that he's got a dead body in the bed with him. They start dating, but he's also killing other women to the tune of XTC's Complicated Game, which will earn us at least an extra half point by the ending of this. But once Franklin's secret is out and he's shot by the police, her problems are bound to be over, right? Well, considering there's over a half hour of movie left, you can rest assured they're not, since that phone still rings and rings and rings. This one's a pretty low-budget job, and it's by Gorman Bichard, who directed and co-wrote. It was his first feature film, and he'd later go on to also make Psychos in Love, and is still making films today, although in the early 2000s, he switched to making documentaries. Alicia is played by Frances Sherman, and we'll see her again a little bit later this year with The Mutilator, and at this point, she was being credited as Frances Rains, her maiden name, and she was actually the niece of the Invisible Man himself, Claude Rains, although I'm assuming that she adopted the last name of Rains with an E in it, as Claude was Rains with no E, as they weren't blood related. Seems that she was a step-niece, and Claude's brother was her stepfather. The budget on this was really low at $48,000, and they shot on a weekend in the director's apartment and managed to get a handful of decent reviews and a national distribution, even if it never really took off. And now go 2.5 here, and it might have been a 3 if the ending didn't drop the ball so hard. It's just doing some appealing low-budget mind-tripping stuff, and it feels like it's doing something, but then the final shot happens and you realize that it kinda wasn't. The HCS is just a 1 since it's extremely obscure and the names attached just aren't enough to give it a greater relevance. Should you watch it? Maybe. I mean, it's cool and dreamlike, but it just doesn't pay off in the way that you want it to.
I feel like I'm stuck right in the middle of a low-budget horror film.
Here's the only one in July that we have a solid date for, and are released on July 13th. And we're going back to school at the Splatter University. This starts in an asylum, and they're clearly insane and not just silly. But one of the patients stabs a doctor in the junk and kills him to escape. It then jumps ahead 3 years, and we're at a college now, and a teacher is killed by someone unseen. And then jumps ahead to the really confusing time frame of the next semester yesterday? And this guy here is from I Was a Teenage Zombie, although he's not a big player here. But a new teacher transfers in to take the place of the murdered teach. We meet the local teens, including this girl with the rare ginger mullet, which is pretty wild, and Julie settles in to the sociology class, but ruffles feathers with the headmaster right away. But then, that killer seems to still be around and starts to murder, while Julie starts dating one of the other teachers. It then jumps ahead again another 3 weeks, so I guess 3 weeks from yesterday? I'm still so confused by that. They throw a good number of red herrings your way, like, is it Mark? Especially when Julie's friend Cynthia seems to be saying he has a dark secret. Is it one of the victim's boyfriends? Especially after he found out that she was pregnant. Maybe it's old Mrs. Bloom, mainly because the film plays dark music literally anytime she's on screen. Or maybe it's this guy, Jimbo. And this is gonna blow your mind because we had that early appearance by John Bryan earlier, but this dude right here is Jim Martin, otherwise known as Sir James Martin of Faith No More. He's virtually completely unrecognizable here without his trademark hair and goatee, and he was actually in the band by this point, but it was before they released an album. And the director here is Richard W. Haynes, and it's his feature film debut, but he'd go on to a couple of other things, the most notable being co-directing Class of Nukem High with Lloyd Kaufman. Apparently this was shot mostly in 1981 but ran short, so they couldn't find distribution, but were able to shoot an additional handful of scenes the following year to get it up to a regular length. The shoot was troubled because they were originally told that they had 2 weeks to use the college location, but when they found out that they were making a slasher film, they cut their time short and were only given a week, prompting them to cut scenes and rewrite others. Also, the script was meant to be a dark comedy, almost a parody, but the producers intervened and wanted a more standard slasher film, cutting out the script's more overt jokes. The budget was really low as well at $50,000, and it was eventually released by Troma, forming a relationship with Haynes, and he'd continue to work with them on a number of projects. Also, if you look at the box art, you'll notice Vice Academy's Elizabeth Catan as the model there, although she's nowhere to be found in the actual movie. And this is decent. It's a 2.5. It's mostly by the numbers and not doing anything unique, but it's pretty fun at times, and I did like the weird downer ending, but not really enough to boost it any higher. The HCS is just a 1.5 since it did get some video store action and was ever so slightly recognizable on those shelves, but not much, and didn't make any impact on the genre. Should you watch it? It's probably worth a shot, but it's also fairly skippable.
Put his head on my shoulder, and I thought he was gonna cry, but instead he started to kiss it. And then he started to move down towards my breasts, and then...
Here's another one that I wasn't totally sure where to place, and it's another one without an exact release date, but it did come out sometime in August, and it's Dreams Come True. We have this young man named Lee, and he works in a factory and lives with his mother, who can't move and can only communicate through eye blinks. When Lee dreams that a co-worker will get injured at work, the next day he sees it happen, but then meets a woman in the best way, go-karting. They instantly hit it off and start doing the deed because that's the power of the cart for you, and the scene is surprisingly more explicit than expected. That night, though, this happens. It gets weird, though, because Lee is then with another girl and going on a date, and when he runs into Go-Kart Girl, he doesn't really remember her. But they talk anyway, and then start dating, but during the night, it happens again, to her as well. Their astral forms have sex, something that Robin freaks out about the next morning. Seems that she thinks that he forced himself on her, but later realizes that it was some sort of shared dream, that they have some sort of connection. They're able to start to exert some control over their abilities, dream traveling to Paris, and just sort of teleporting out. But the problems begin when they're exploring the real world and flying into a hot air balloon and enter into a nightmare world and almost die. So they consult a book on out-of-body experiences where they discover that they can die in the nightmare world, which will trap their souls forever. And oh, yeah, Robin also has a creepy, rapey uncle. Like, literally, she hasn't been home in years. And she goes to find that book, and he sees her there. And the very first thing he does when he spots her is to start pulling his pants down. And if he looks familiar, it's because he's Richard Frank from Dawn of the Dead, otherwise known as the eye patch guy on TV who called everyone dummies. But the way they'll die is if they're woken up while their soul is traveling, since that's how it gets trapped. This one is directed by Max Kalmanowitz, and we've seen him before, back in 1980, with the children. And there's even a point in this film where Lee and Robin go to the movies and they see the children, and we're treated to several minutes of footage from that film. He made this one in his hometown of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, on a very low budget, using mostly local actors. Oh, and it's weird that this has become a trend for this block, but there's also an early role for musicians that would later become famous. The soundtrack is by the band Spooner, a mildly popular new wave act of the time, but half of them would later go on to form Garbage, including producer Butch Vig, one of the biggest producers of the 90s, and the band can briefly be spotted in the bar in the film. And I like this. It's a 3. It's not much horror and is more fantasy and romance, I suppose, but definitely dips into horror at times. But I like the character stuff, and it's pretty fun, if uneven. The HCS is just a 1 though, since it's very forgotten and doesn't have any established names going for it. Should you watch it? Yeah, I mean, like I said, don't do it if you're in a horror mood, but it's still worth a look. Hey, speaking of themes for this episode, that last one was about sex outside the body, and our next film, which came out on August 11th, is Sex Beyond the Grave. This has a family in a big house, and one night, a family goes up to the gate saying that they're being chased, so they're let in. They have a ton of cash and jewelry with them, but they're found by soldiers, and the father and son are killed, but the mother is raped and then killed, and the actor is said to have left the house haunted. It's then modern times, and Tony Liu is here, who we saw a while back in Human Lanterns, and he's a professor with a wife and child. His friend is a bit of a jerky guy and a compulsive gambler, and his luck is up and down, and at one point, he goes to watch an American stripper, in a scene that really doesn't have much to do with anything else except to have a naked lady in it. But he also gets really beat up, and ends up owing a ton of money. In an effort to help everyone out, the gambler guy's wife sells his grandfather's house to the professor to try to get some money to pay their debt. Weird stuff starts right away, and soon there's haunted rice cookers, floating mahjong tiles, and ripped pants. Hilarious video game hauntings, leading up to the most hilarious floating kid, flying refrigerator, and flying dolls. But when the little guy goes missing, sucked into the house, it's time for an exorcist to step in. And when that fails, they call in another, and little Nicky's voice calls to them from the walls. And they have an animated doll. Little kid trapped in the walls of a haunted house. This all sounding a touch familiar. And yeah, this is essentially a response to Poltergeist, except with the inclusion of a magic fetus in a box and zombies. And it turns out that it's up to Goofy Tao to make things right, since it's in his bloodline that caused the trouble in the first place. And this was also from the Shaw Brothers, the Major League Chinese production team responsible for so many action sagas. This one's throwing a bit of everything against the wall to see what sticks, and lifts audio cues from both Phantasm and Flash Gordon. The director was Chun Kung Chiu, and he had only done a handful of films before this, but nothing of much impact. And this would be his final film before taking a 16-year break, only returning to direct again in the year 2000, where he made 2 films and then no more. And it's mostly fine. I'll go 2.5 on it. It starts out bold, but then it's like way too much gambling drama and takes forever to get to the house. Once they're there though, it's fun stuff, but there's just too many lulls to be great, although the ending is awesome stuff. The significance is just a 1, since it's not known in the US and seems to not even be that big of a hit in its home country. Should you watch it? Maybe. There's some great moments, but they're just too cushioned by other stuff. So there you have it, a touch more of the obscure side of 1984 there, although there were some pretty fun flicks in here, and my favorite of them is definitely Company of the Wolves. It's just a really cool looking movie, even though I think that the plot doesn't totally nail everything. The script is a little bit weak at times, but it is just a gorgeous movie, great performances, and really cool effects. So that's my favorite on this block. Let me know what your favorite is. Let me know down below in the comments which of these you've seen, which of these you haven't seen, which of these you'd now like to see. Tell me that down below in the comments. Also hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy what you're seeing, and check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines. And yeah, like I said, we're now about halfway through 1984. So, making our way through this year. And there's still a lot of big movies left to come right here on the 80s Project.